Americans have proven one thing over the years: the economy is a bipartisan issue, possibly the only one we have left. Over the years, the American voter has shown an absolute willingness to cross party lines and vote with their wallets, and that is about the only thing that people will cross the political divide for these days. Look at Reagan and Clinton. Both saw huge swings in the electorate. Loading. Voters swung to Obama and the Dems after Wall Street crashed the economy, and likewise the Rust Belt, who did not enjoy the improving economy as much as others, put the GOP in power again in 2016. This stuff is not new and is the only constant in American politics. Which is why Sebastian Gorka's full list of Trump's accomplishments spells doom for the Democrats in 2020. Gorka wrote, 5.5 million jobs created since my election, with 196,000 jobs added last month. More Americans are working today than ever before in our history. Nearly 160 million Americans now have jobs. March was the 102nd straight month of positive job growth. Longest streak ever. There are a record number of job openings. A record 73% of newly employed workers were people who were out of the workforce and who are now coming off the sidelines and into the workforce. The unemployment rate has remained at or below 4% for 13 straight months. It recently reached its lowest rate in nearly 50 years. We have created 500,000 manufacturing jobs since my election. More manufacturing jobs were created in 2018 than any single year in the last 20 years. Blue-collar jobs recently grew at the fastest rate in more than 3 decades. GDP grew at 3% during the 4 quarters of 2018, the fastest rate of any calendar year since 2005. Wages grew by 3.2% over the past 12 months. The largest increase in 10 years. Wage growth in 2018 was fastest for the lowest wage earners. Hispanic American unemployment in February fell to its lowest rate in history. African American and Asian American unemployment rates have reached all-time record lows. Women's unemployment is at its lowest rate in 65 years. Veteran unemployment has reached the lowest rate in nearly 20 years. Youth unemployment reached the lowest rate in nearly half a century. Unemployment rate for Americans without a high school diploma hit a new low. Unemployment rate for disabled Americans recently hit a record low. Over 5 million Americans have been lifted off food stamps since the election. Median income for Hispanic Americans surpassed $50,000 for the first time ever. Homeownership among Hispanics recently hit the highest rate in nearly a decade. The official poverty rates for African Americans and Hispanic Americans have reached their lowest levels ever recorded. Manufacturing, consumer and small business confidence recently set record highs. A recent study found that 8 in 10 businesses plan to hire more workers this year. Signed the biggest package of tax cuts and reforms in history. Since then, almost $600 billion poured back into the U.S. and more than 6 million workers received new bonuses, better jobs, and bigger paychecks. Saved family farms from the death tax and doubled the child tax credit. Obamacare individual mandate penalty gone. Under our tax cut, small businesses can now deduct 20% of their business income. The Pledge to America's Workers has secured private sector commitments to provide over 6.7 million jobs and training opportunities to American workers. Reauthorized and modernized the Perkins Career and Technical Education Bill. Announced a historic U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement to replace NAFTA. Concluded a tremendous new trade deal with South Korea, and will begin trade negotiations with Japan to open new markets for American workers and farmers. Reached a breakthrough agreement with the EU to increase U.S. exports. Imposed tariffs on foreign steel and aluminum to protect our national security. Imposed tariffs on China in response to China's IP theft. forced technology transfer and its chronically abusive trade practices, confirmed Supreme Court Justices Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh, confirmed more circuit court judges than any other new administration, helped win U.S. bid for the 2028 Summer Olympics in Los Angeles, helped win U.S.-Mexico-Canada's united bid for 2026 World Cup, opened ANWR and approved Keystone XL and Dakota Access pipelines. Record number of regulations eliminated, saving $33 billion. Enacted regulatory relief for community banks and credit unions. My administration is making more affordable healthcare options available for Americans through association health plans and short-term limited-duration plans. Prescription drug prices declined in 2018, the first time in nearly half a century. In 2017 and 2018, the FDA approved more affordable generic drugs than ever before. Many drug companies are freezing or reversing planned price increases. Signed legislation to end gag clauses so patients can find the lowest priced drugs. Passed right to try to give critically ill patients access to more life-saving cures. We reformed the Medicare program to stop hospitals from overcharging seniors on their drugs, saving seniors hundreds of millions of dollars in 2018 alone. Secured $6 billion in funding to fight the opioid epidemic, reduced high-dose opioid prescriptions by 16% during my first year in office. Signed historic VA choice legislation and the VA Accountability Act. Expanded VA telehealth services, walk-in clinics, same-day urgent primary and mental health care, and launched the promised 24-hour veteran hotline. Signed an executive order to help prevent veteran suicide. Increased coal exports by more than 60% during my first year in office. The U.S. is the largest producer of oil and natural gas, surpassing Saudi Arabia and Russia. We are a net exporter of natural gas for the first time since 1957. Announced our withdrawal from the job-killing Paris Climate Accord. Cancelled the illegal, anti-coal, so-called Clean Power Plan. Signed a bipartisan criminal justice reform bill into law. Secured a record $700 billion in military funding, $716 billion this year. Secured a $100 billion increase in defense spending from NATO allies. Launched whole-of-government approach to women's economic empowerment around the world, WGDP. With a goal of empowering 50 million women by 2025. Nuclear and ballistic missile testing in North Korea have stopped, hostages have been released, and the remains of our fallen warriors were returned home. Process has begun to make the Space Force the sixth branch of the armed forces. Initiated withdrawal from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces, INF. Treaty. Withdrew from the one-sided Iran deal and imposed the toughest sanctions ever. First country to recognize Juan Guaido as interim president of Venezuela. Recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and moved the U.S. Embassy. Took historic action to recognize Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights. Protecting Americans from terrorists with travel ban, upheld by Supreme Court. ISIS has been driven out from all territory they once held in Iraq and Syria. Issued executive order to keep open Guantanamo Bay. Improved vetting for refugees, and switched focus to overseas settlement. We have begun building the wall and support strong borders and no crime. Loading. Let's block ads. Why?